On September 26, 2018 at 11 a.m., a woman named Emiri Suzaki came to Ogu police station. She confessed to the officers on duty that she had supposedly been storing a dead body within a storage locker. Police, not taking the matter lightly, immediately began working off of Suzaki's testimony to find the body in question. But this was far from the most interesting part about this case. You see, the police had no issues finding the body in question, but the locker wasn't inside of her house or even a private location. It was out in public, at Ogui Sudani Station, a train station within Tokyo. Not only that, but this wasn't your typical tall, long high school locker either. It was a small coin-operated one, typically only large enough to hold a small suitcase or a bag. And as the officers moved in to open up this locker, what they would find inside is something they wouldn't forget for a long time. It's no secret that a large part of Maretu's reputation in Vocaloid comes from his dark views towards the world. With songs covering topics ranging from self-harm to child abuse and even suicide, he's built his reputation on a foundation of bold lyricism and imagery. And while some people might be disgusted by a person gaining so much acclaim from such controversial topics, I think it's fully deserved. You see, Maretu never uses his lyrics or subject matter in poor taste. While most media covering such graphic material would almost want to pervert it to meet their own personal gain in my opinion, when I listen to Maretu's music I almost feel like he wants to do something vastly more difficult, which is to get us to understand the hardships and problems of the victims of his songs. Look at a song like Eraser Girl, for example. It's a story of a couple driven to the point of suicide by realizing they can't find happiness in each other, due to the brutal world they live in, taking their lives as one final act of defiance. Now, from that perspective, it's not much different from a story like Romeo and Juliet. But what makes Maretu's narratives vastly more interesting to me is the realism he adds. The couple doesn't come from two rival families or anything vastly unrealistic or complicated. They're just a simple couple that can't stop fighting every day, going back and forth at each other, never resolving their issues. And when they realize they'll never escape these arguments, that the world around them will continue to erode their love, they choose to end their lives before things get any worse. That's it. There's nothing super gripping or extraordinary about them, but that's what makes it feel so real. They're just ordinary people like you and me, and because of that I can feel their frustration, their anger, but more than anything else, their exhaustion. And in my opinion, the truly disturbing and terrifying part of Maretu's music has never been the things that boldly stand out. It's always the things that you're not paying attention to. Maybe it's because the music sounds so upbeat, but this wasn't the first conclusion I came to listening to this song. These were emotions I had to find by carefully digesting these lyrics, by almost reading between the lines. And for me, the more Maretu leaves for us as an audience to decipher on our own, the more terrifying his music becomes. There's a song called Before I Was Born by Maretu that I find absolutely brilliant. It effortlessly blends electropop with elements of metal without ever sounding jarring or out of place. In fact, it wasn't until I listened to Rational Time off of his debut album that I realized how vastly influenced by metal Maretu's sound really is. That's how well he incorporates these heavy guitar riffs or shredding drums with these chiptune synths. But the part of the song that always stuck with me the most is towards the end. The moment in the song where the music suddenly pulls back, the visuals are cut off, and we're left with just this vast and empty black screen. The rhythm and beat are still there, sure, but it's almost like there's something missing, like we're listening to something that was never meant to be heard. The only way I can really put into words the discomfort this moment gives me is that it's like walking in the depths of the woods and seeing a cave. Even though it's a bright and sunny day out, the inside remains pitch black, and it's almost impossible to tell where it goes. You know it's an awful idea to go inside, but your morbid curiosity gets the better of you. And while you can't see a single thing, it's that curiosity that keeps you going in further and further, until you're completely lost and helpless. Your only comfort being the repetition of the noises around you as you slowly lose your mind. Music, in my opinion, is the most powerful medium that fear can be conveyed to us in. In other mediums of art such as film, video games, or even manga, a lot of what we're supposed to be scared of is already determined beforehand by the artist. Therefore, in a lot of cases, there's not a lot of imagination or freedom left to the audience. It's a clearly defined line. A jump scare or a terrifying page passes, and your brain determines immediately what the threat is. Therefore, in a lot of cases, there's not a lot of imagination or freedom left to the audience to decide what's supposed to be scary. That's not to say I don't love horror in these mediums or they don't scare the crap out of me, but music has this rare luxury of simply conveying an idea to us. It can't show us specifically what's supposed to be scary, so it relies on the idea of suggestion. It's left to the audience to fill in those gaps. And as a result, I think there's a much stronger connection for the audience because we're essentially creating our own personal hell. There's this album called Soundtracks for the Blind by a band called Swans, and it's probably the most terrifying album I have ever listened to. It's a massive album though, 26 songs spanning 2 hours, but I binged the whole thing the first time I listened to it. And what makes it so unique is that each song takes on its own personality or life. Like opening different doors in a hallway, they each have their own unique way of getting under your skin. But the one song that always scares me the most from this album is a song called I Was a Prisoner in Your Skull. It's this bizarre ambient piece with these terrifying droning sounds and this odd windshield wiping synth pattern. But that's not the part that scares me about it. In fact, I think some of you might start to laugh when you hear the man in the background moaning to himself. But I promise you, all that laughter will be immediately gone the moment the music silently stops.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Well, fuck. I mean, I just don't know what to say. Very glad to be here with you tonight. Be able to talk to you about some things that I know a great deal about. Everyone knows that you are fucked up. And everyone knows that I am fucked up. But does everyone know that you are more fucked up than me? Well, I know that.
What you listen to is one of several tapes taken from the desk of one of the band members' fathers who worked in the FBI. And over the course of the spoken word by this criminal, he's taunting the FBI for recording him, making these elaborate comparisons, calling them essentially monsters. Because they rely on him committing these awful acts in order to put food on the table every day. That they've made a career out of following his deplorable actions. But what really frightens me about this isn't how delusional he sounds, it's how personal it feels. Every time I listen to this song, I feel like I'm right in that negotiation room with him, sitting in that opposite chair as he says all of this. I tell myself it's just a recording, but it really does feel like he's talking right past them, and somehow he's talking directly to you. And the way he phrases everything makes it seem like some warped intervention. Like some random stranger has figured out all your deepest and darkest secrets.
That is one instance of how fucked up you are. A second instance of how fucked you are. Now a third instance, the way you're fucked up.
You would think a producer with so much influence and popularity by now would have no issues finding artists to animate his songs. But I would argue those still images are a vital part to the horror of Maretu's music. I think Maretu understands, like Swans, that there would be a magic taken away by visualizing his music. Take the MVs for Addiction and SIU for example. The visuals of Addiction are absolutely stunning. Attention to detail and the careful color coordination on everything just makes the page pop. But it lacks the oppressive nature that those dull grays and blacks seem to give SIU. Actually, the majority of this song, like many of Maretu's videos, is just spent on a black screen. But unlike Addiction, there's a strange chill I get down my spine every time I hear one of those distorted cries, or as the music slowly falls apart in my ears towards the end. Not to mention the added power the song seems to gain when the visuals do return to the screen. Once again, our imagination and the anxiety or stress we create on our own will always be a greater source of fear for an artist to work off of. But while there certainly is a terror in the unknown, I would argue as well that sometimes finding the truth, that finding those answers can sometimes be just as vastly disturbing. While there is a defined outline for what we can and cannot put visually on a screen, where is that outline for audio? What's considered too cruel or too awful to put to the human ears? The answer is that there is none. It's merely context. You see, while the ending of Coin Locker Baby sends a wave of revulsion in me that I could say very few things manage to do, the real reason why it makes me so uncomfortable isn't really the graphic sounds or the creepy music. It's the context of the song. It's because of the lyrics and what I know about the subject at hand. We, unfortunately, can't decide what we remember or forget. And while knowledge may indeed be power, there's a responsibility, or should I say consequence, that comes with it. We unconsciously associate certain sounds automatically with certain concepts or ideas, and this means our mind can essentially play tricks on us. But I would go even further to argue that the more knowledge you have pertaining to a certain concept or idea, the more weight or horror audio can have over you as a result. And I think the title track of Maretu's debut album, Coin Locker Baby, is a perfect example of that. When the officers opened up the locker, all they saw was a single plastic bag, and inside of that was the body of a stillborn baby. The body had decayed so much that they couldn't even tell the sex. According to Suzaki, the body was 4 to 5 years old. Apparently panicking after the miscarriage, she had hid the body in the locker and repeatedly moved the body to different lockers over the years. Now, in Japan, coin lockers could typically only allow you to store luggage for about 3 days. After that, the staff reserves the right to open your locker and check the contents. That means this woman had been moving this body for at least twice a week or more for half a decade. I can't even begin to imagine what that does to you mentally. Unfortunately, this is only one incident of Japan's long history of infants being abandoned in these coin lockers. And if I'm going to be honest, this is a much tamer case in comparison to others. At least the mother acted. At least she admitted to what she did. In fact, at least it was a stillborn child. The harsh reality is that most of these infants, when found and examined, died from asphyxiation. Not only that, but most of them were wrapped in plastic too. This only leaves us with two awful possibilities, that either A, these infants were suffocated before being placed in there, or B, slowly ran out of air while within those lockers. But why neglect a child like this, especially in a culture globally recognized for its safety and high life expectancy? How could something like this happen? To answer that, we have to go back to the Meiji Restoration. The Meiji Restoration marked a point of rapid modernization for Japanese society. After closing their borders for 2 centuries, Japan had a lot of catching up to do. And one of the consequences for this obsessive focus by the government to modernize was that public welfare was not a high priority. If you were a farmer, for example, your family was probably severely taxed and had very few resources to feed a large family. This meant that it was virtually impossible to raise more than 1 or 2 kids in some areas. But in a period where benefits such as birth control didn't exist, how in the world did the population manage to stay this consistent regardless? Unfortunately, I think you already know the answer. Your only option was to abandon your child. If you were lucky, you would be adopted by another family, or maybe left in a basket in front of a temple or shrine. But in some cases, children were put into trafficking or even infanticide, meaning they would be killed by asphyxiation, crushing injuries, or even decapitation. There was this one method called usugoro, where the mother would wrap the infant between 2 straw lids and roll a wooden mortar over it. She would have to bury it herself and be expected to be out in the fields the next day working, like nothing happened. But the most disturbing part of all of this was that at that time, this was culturally accepted and definitely not recognized as a criminal activity. And how could you blame them? Having to take the life of your own child must have been a horrifying thing to do, no matter how culturally accepted it was. And it was just an unfortunate result of a system that didn't see its people as people. Thankfully, prohibitions would later be passed and child welfare would gradually progress as well. And as you can see, the population rapidly increased after World War II thanks to these measures. But the tendency to kill children persisted, and in the 1970s, coin-operated lockers were introduced to Japan. These small private spaces offered a great way to store luggage or packages on trips, but they served other purposes too. They made a great space for illegal activities such as drugs, guns, and unfortunately in some cases, dead bodies. The situation got so bad that by 1975, the term coin-operated locker baby had been introduced. And in 1981, action finally had to be taken. Lockers were relocated to more visible areas, patrols were assigned to monitor these locations. The problem became publicized by the media, and education about contraception was increased as well. But despite all of this, from 1980 to 1990, there was a total of 191 coin locker babies found. Ignorance is bliss. For me, Maretu's music never came off as music made for doomers that hate society. To me, it came off as a man who wanted to wake up the world to the problems and ideas we're constantly trying to run away from. A song like White Happy, for example, while focusing on a society where everyone is self-centered, that we only value individuals with talent, it's not merely just a nihilist simply complaining about life. He's offering solutions, opinions, and advice. But there's a weight you have to carry for facing those cruel realities and truths that makes it so much more difficult to live your life the same way afterwards. There certainly is a terror in the unknown, but sometimes finding out what was there can be just as vastly disturbing. And it only comes off as dark because, well, I think we don't want to face it. Sometimes we just need those mental barriers. Because I think for me, just like that cave, my sheer curiosity alone will keep driving me further and further in. And I'm afraid if I go too far, I just won't ever come back out. And maybe that's the scariest part of all. Thanks for watching.
You know, sometimes I think I've lived my whole life inside of a dark cave. The walls are gauze, and the wind that blows in through the mouth of the cave smells of ether and disinfectant. Because there's a kind of a comfort living inside this cave. Wonderfully private. Nobody can ever see me.